Number 9. MS World Discoverer. The MS World Discoverer was a German-built cruise ship made in 1974. It started its life by carting people around on their vacations. It was built to withstand the frigid Arctic and was capable of navigating much of the icy Northwestern Passage. The ship even occasionally went on Antarctic cruises. Yet the durable vessel unexpectedly met its end when it struck an uncharted reef near the Solomon Islands in the year 2000. A ferry responded to the captain's distress signal and safely evacuated all the passengers. The ship began to list, so the captain grounded it in Roderick Bay to prevent it from sinking. Insurance inspectors classified the wreck as a loss. Ever since, the World Discoverer has sat, neglected, and slowly sinking, still in Roderick Bay. It's practically laying on its side, currently listing at 46 degrees. It's more or less inevitable that the vessel will eventually be completely lost below the surface of the water. Time, neglect, and the elements have not been kind to the ship. Over the years, several companies have tried to salvage the World Discoverer, but they found that on top of being damaged by Mother Nature, it was ransacked by locals during a violent civil war on the islands. Simply put, there was no saving the doomed ship. The wreck has become a tourist destination, but who knows how long it'll be there. So if you have a nagging itch to see it, you'd better do so before it's too late. Number 8. Chicken Church. Back in the 1990s, a man named Daniel Alamja felt inspired by God to build a prayer house that he had a dream about. Even though he's a devout Christian, Alamja envisioned a site that welcomed all religions. More specifically, he wanted the building to be in the shape of a dove and to sit atop a hillside near his home in central Java, Indonesia. The ambitious man bought an acre of land and got to work. Alamja's creation ended up looking more like a hen than a dove, earning it the nickname Gereja Ayam, or Chicken Church. But he went ahead and opened it to the public anyway. Various religions held services on the upper floors, while the lower levels were used for rehabilitating drug addicts and caring for disabled children. The site even functioned as an asylum for the mentally ill. But philanthropy doesn't pay the bills, and Alamja eventually went broke. To make matters worse, locals weren't as excited about his humanitarian vision as he was, and they didn't hesitate to let him know. Feeling he had no other choice, Alamja left the bizarre building behind in 2000. Since then, time and the elements have taken their toll on the Chicken Church, and it's currently in a state of decay. But that hasn't stopped stories and pictures from circulating on the internet, drawing curious visitors to the site from near and far. People have even gotten married and had their wedding photos taken there. The Chicken Church became so popular that some people have helped to make it look a tad less decrepit by covering the walls with vibrant murals and even opening a cafe inside. Only Mr. Alamja himself knows exactly what was going on in his mind when he decided to build this strange structure. But its late blooming popularity means that at least one of his desires was fulfilled: to see people enjoying the Chicken Church. Number 7. Boss 400 Shipwreck. In 1994, a French crane barge named the Boss 400 ran aground during a storm in Maori Bay off the South African coast. At the time, it was the largest floating crane in Africa, and it was capable of lifting 1,200 tons, but the Boss 400 lacked engines of its own and had to be towed from place to place by a tugboat. The barge was being pulled by an underpowered Russian tug called the Tiger when it hit the rocks. It was en route to Cape Town from the Republic of Congo and had almost reached its destination when the tow rope broke. The crew radioed for help, and 2 more tugboats radioed to the scene. But the seas were rough, and they failed to connect any lines to the barge. Left with no other choice than to abandon the ship, the crew members were airlifted to safety. Several salvage attempts were made, but in the end, the Boss 400 was declared a total loss. Its owners had no choice but to leave the $70 million barge nestled among the boulders where it remains today. For now, the crane and part of the vessel are visible above sea level, but the wreck is disintegrating and will eventually disappear beneath the waves. Number 6. Wani UFO Village. About an hour's drive outside the Taiwanese capital of Taipei, there's a mysterious abandoned holiday resort that looks like something from another world. Known as the Wani UFO Village or the Sanji Village, the failed housing development was designed by Finnish architect Matti Saarinen during the 1970s and 80s. The plans consisted of 2 types of houses: Futuro dwellings, which resembled flying saucers, and Venturo homes, which were slightly more normal looking but still had an extraterrestrial feel. Saarinen designed these abodes to be part of a futuristic, upscale, and high-tech beachside resort. But for reasons that remain unclear to this day, the project was abandoned during the 1980s. Some people actually live in these prefabricated otherworldly homes, but most are empty, and some parts of the village have been demolished according to remote lands. Although the development never fully came to fruition, it's successful in its own right as a dilapidated tourist destination. What's left of the settlement consists of strangely shaped decaying houses and roads with grass growing through the pavement. The homes have rusting metal fixtures, faded paintings on the walls, and other telltale signs of decomposition and desertion. Roofs are caved in, windows are shattered, and the walls are crumbling. For years, rumors circulated about developers planning to fully demolish the site and build something more promising, but it hasn't happened yet. It appears as though Taiwan's tourism industry benefits from the decrepit neighborhood that was never lived in, but seems to attract visitors to the island. Would you ever stay in a place like this? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. Chantellan Car Graveyard. There was a spooky car graveyard full of rusting automobiles in southern Belgium. Nestled within a small forest near the village of Chantellan, the vehicles supposedly belonged to U.S. soldiers who were stationed in the area during World War I, according to one story at least. When the war ended and it was time to return home, it would have been extremely expensive for American troops to ship the cars they had bought overseas back to the States. To spare themselves the cost, the soldiers allegedly drove the vehicles into the woods, parked them neatly in rows, and simply left them behind. If this story is true, it means that nobody ever missed their car enough to go back and get it. Locals are quick to point out that many of the vehicles at the site were made after World War II, suggesting that perhaps it's just an ordinary junkyard in a weird place. The cars were removed from the forest in 2010 though, so we'll probably never know the full story behind the strange site, which lives on only in photographs. Number 4. Lake Reschen Bell Tower. Lake Reschen is a man-made lake in South Tyrol, Italy, near the Austrian and Swiss borders. It's famous for a 14th century steeple that sticks out of the water. The lake wasn't always there though. Back in 1920, there were plans to create a smaller, shallower body of water as a reservoir for a hydroelectric plant. Then in 1939, the chemical company Montecatini proposed to create a larger lake than originally planned by bringing two natural bodies of water together. This would require builders to submerge several villages. The project was delayed several times due to World War II and resistance from locals who didn't want their homes and land to be put underwater. Finally, in 1950, water began to flow into the Vinschgau Valley, drowning 163 homes and 1,290 acres of cultivated land. Before the lake was made, workers demolished the nave of the Church of St. Caterina and removed the bells from its steeple. Founded in 1357, the historic house of worship once stood as a testament to the area's long and rich history. Most of it is no longer there. But for whatever reason, the bell tower was left in place, and now it's become somewhat of a tourist attraction. Authorities have even drained the lake on a few occasions to perform maintenance on it, ensuring that the steeple continues to stand, even though the rest of the town wasn't considered important enough to save. Even though there are no longer any bells in the tower, local legend claims that you can sometimes hear them ringing during the winter. Number 3. Lapise Castle. Lapise Castle isn't really a castle, but that's what it's called, and it's kind of what it looks like too. Confused? So are we. Located in northern Poland, the structure is actually a derelict mansion that was abandoned before it was finished being built. Construction began in 1979 on what was supposed to be a grand estate and studio for an artist named Peter Kazimierziak. His dream home was supposed to include a swimming pool, a ballroom, ramparts, and 12 towers representing the 12 apostles, according to Atlas Obscura. But Kazimierziak ran out of money while it was being built, and the mansion was partially on land that he didn't exactly have a permit to build on. The artist had no choice but to abandon the partially finished home. No banks were willing to purchase the site due to its extremely high cost and incomplete state. In 2006, Kazimierziak was ordered to demolish the strange eyesore. He couldn't afford to do so, and the local council said they would have it knocked down at some point in the near future. However, 15 years later, Lapise Castle still stands. Some sources have said that Kazimierziak hasn't given up on his vision, and that he's even trying to get permission to resume the construction. But for now, the medieval-looking mansion is an empty shell with graffiti all over its walls. Word has it that it's falling into a state of decay and losing its structural integrity, which of course attracts urban explorers who enter the property at their own risk. What the future holds for Lapise Castle is anyone's guess. Number 2. Bartini-Beriev VVA-14 plane. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union competed to outsupply the other with military equipment. This frenzied contest was quite possibly the biggest and most expensive arms race in history. During this tense time, the Soviet Union made it a priority to prepare for missile strikes from deep in the ocean. To combat these threats, the Soviet Navy developed a strange-looking aircraft called the Bartini-Beriev VVA-14 plane. This amphibious vehicle operated on both the water and in the air. Its primary task was to detect American submarines and prevent nuclear missile strikes. The strange-looking aircraft was named after its Italian-born designer, Robert Bartini. It was perched on pontoons and was piloted by a three-man crew. The plane was capable of vertical takeoff, taking off and landing in the water or on land, and skimming along the water while patrolling for enemy submarines. 2 prototypes were built, but the project was ultimately scrapped. Only 1 prototype survives today. It sits near the Russian Air Force Museum outside Moscow and is more of an eyesore than a museum exhibit. The lonely, dilapidated aircraft is missing its wings and serves as a reminder of the immense time and money that was spent on failed innovations during the Cold War. In 2013, a group of aviation enthusiasts campaigned to revive the Bartini-Burri VVA-14 plane, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Number 1. Teufelsberg Spy Station. On the edge of Berlin in the Grunewald Forest, there's a 262-foot, 80-meter hill known as Teufelsberg, or Devil's Hill. It was created with debris from thousands of buildings that were destroyed during World War II. Up to 800 truckloads of rubbish were dumped at the site every day for years. During the 1950s, the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, built a station on the hill for spying on communist East Germany. It consisted of large round buildings called radomes, as well as huge satellite dishes that were used for intercepting and jamming correspondences among members of the Eastern Bloc. American intelligence officials used the facility until the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, signaling the end of the Cold War. After that, the site functioned as an air traffic control center for 10 years. The government sold the property in 1999, but it was never redeveloped. 5 large decommissioned radar domes remain standing on Devil's Hill today, serving as an eerie reminder of Cold War-era tensions and paranoia between nations. Visitors can tour certain parts of the graffiti-covered decrepit facility, but if you're not sold on the idea of visiting an abandoned intelligence base, Teufelsberg is worth a trip for the stunning views it offers of the Berlin skyline. Documents from Teufelsberg are slated to become declassified next year and will provide the first ever glimpse into the site's daily activities. Number 10. Japanese midget submarine. All over the world there are relics of war machines from World War II rusting away, and some of the most insane finds are in remote waters or jungles of the South Pacific. There is a rare Japanese Type A midget submarine abandoned on Kiska Island. This mysterious submarine was once a secret weapon deployed by the Japanese in World War II. This particular vehicle was brought to the island in 1942, though it was never able to see any action. The whole point of the midget submarine was that the 2 men squeezed into its hull, tracked down an enemy vessel, and then fired miniature torpedoes at it from point-blank range. It was the most claustrophobic vehicle a person could drive in World War II. It also had a shockingly low survivability rating. Japanese soldiers who drove the midget submarines were acutely aware that they could die at just about any minute. Kiska Island was a weird place to deploy submarines from. These things ran on battery power and almost always needed to be rescued by another ship once their batteries ran out. Several midget submarines were used at the attack on Pearl Harbor, but these ones were dumped on Kiska Island and then abandoned after the Japanese realized they were about to lose the war. The sub is in rough shape, rusting quite badly and almost gone after over 70 years of being forgotten. Number 9. Dinosaur eggs. Yes, it's possible that this find could spark a real-life Jurassic Park if scientists aren't careful. A clutch of dinosaur eggs was recently discovered by paleontologists in western Portugal during investigations at the Lorena Formation. This formation is known for being rich in Jurassic dinosaur nesting sites. Experts say 150 million years ago, the area was a wetland that experienced heavy monsoon rains, making it the perfect place for nesting bird-like dinos. But what's strange is that the nest was abandoned mysteriously, and the eggs were left vulnerable before somehow getting fossilized. These eggs weren't found whole, but rather shattered into eggshells with no remaining dinosaur embryos inside. Still, researchers were able to analyze the size and texture of the eggshells. This helped them determine that the eggs had belonged to a Torvosaurus, a type of bipedal dinosaur that grew to be roughly 36 feet, 11 meters tall. As for their DNA, it's probably not complete enough to truly resurrect the creatures, but with more advanced technology, it's possible that someday genetic engineers will be able to use these eggs to spawn new dinosaur breeds. The big mystery here is trying to figure out why the dinosaur abandoned the nest of eggs. Scientists can't figure out whether the carnivorous creature was a neglectful parent or if they simply made nests and then abandoned the eggs to fend for themselves. Either way, some kind of event, likely a flood, covered the eggshells suddenly and kept them preserved as fossils. Number 8. Homo erectus tools. Inside an abandoned gold mine in the Sahara Desert, archaeologists working with the University of Wrocław discovered a small hoard of tools likely used by ancient human ancestors. These ancestors are known as Homo erectus, who became the most advanced hominid species a few 100,000 years ago. Their tools consisted of cleavers and very primitive hand axes. The researchers were able to use a method called optically stimulated luminescence to determine the age of the tools, dating them back to about 390,000 years ago. However, the researchers say also that these types of tools were probably used as far back as 700,000 years ago. As you can clearly tell, the transition from primitive stone axes to iron tools took almost 1,000,000 years for humans to complete. What's really interesting is that the tools were found in an abandoned mine that had been carved crudely out of the ground during the African gold rush. But hundreds of thousands of years before the mine was abandoned, this may have been a prehistoric workshop where expert Homo erectus craftsmen made stone tools. Then at some point, the prehistoric people abandoned the site and moved on to somewhere else. And yet there might still be troves of tools and gold hidden under the sands of the Sahara, waiting for explorers to uncover them. Would you go exploring and hunt for the treasure out there? Number 7. The abandoned Sphinx. A mysterious Sphinx allegedly abandoned by the grandfather of King Tut has been found in Egypt. The Sphinx is interesting because it has the head of a ram instead of the head of a human, like the one at Giza has. It's almost 3,000 years old and nearly 12 feet. Archaeologists found it inside of a quarry of debris that had been discarded during the Roman occupation of Egypt around 2,000 years before today. In other words, the Sphinx had been part of a garbage dump created by the Romans. There were also stone fragments with hieroglyphics on them found in the rubble, as well as a coiled cobra that had once been used as a headdress to crown the Sphinx. When it was first carved, it would have been a truly fascinating monument to behold. According to Maria Nilsson, an archaeologist from Sweden, the Sphinx may have been abandoned after the pharaoh died and the sculptures he had commissioned were cancelled. The date of the Sphinx suggests it was carved at the exact end of King Amenhotep III's reign. With him gone, the sculptors just abandoned work on their masterpieces. When the Romans came later, they threw them in the trash. Number 6. Human remains. At an abandoned house in the United Kingdom, in Liverpool to be exact, something gruesome and horrifying was discovered. Mysterious human remains were found abandoned in a jar inside the creepy house. According to the local police, the authorities were made aware of a suspicious circumstance at the unoccupied address. It's not clear who exactly found the jar full of human body parts, though it was probably an urban explorer. The person probably thought it would be fun to check out the abandoned property. Well, finding pickled human pieces was probably not what the individual had in mind. This happened in August of 2021, so police have yet to announce the exact details of the human pieces. They won't even divulge why the house was abandoned or who left it in such terrible shape. We still don't know if the human remains came from a murder victim, from a science experiment, or from something even more sinister that you don't want to imagine. What do you think was going on in this house? What kind of sick individual puts human body parts in a jar anyway? Was this part of some sadistic ritual or something else? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. World War II bunker. During the depths of World War II, soldiers made use of anything they could in order to protect themselves and create defensive bunkers. A forgotten bunker from World War II was found by an archaeologist hiding inside the broken ruins of an old Roman fortress. The fortress is on the Channel Island in the UK. It's one of the best preserved fortresses of its kind, located just north of Normandy in France, kind of between the British Isle and the European mainland. Back during World War II, Hitler had ordered the occupation of the island. Nazis built bases, they turned the island into a fortified war castle, and they even built a small concentration camp to keep the war machine running. One of their bunkers was built inside of the old Roman fortress. After the war ended, most of the bunkers and other Nazi constructs were abandoned and destroyed. However, nobody thought to look inside the ancient Roman fortress. It wasn't until a charity organization called Dig Alderney volunteered to help with some summer excavations that they uncovered the mysterious abandoned bunker. The Nazis had incorporated their own technologies with the Roman fortress, using its walls to strengthen the outpost and conducting their business deep in the fort's basement. Number 4. Walt Disney's personal plane. Believe it or not, the personal airplane of Walt Disney has been sitting abandoned at Disney World for years. Disney World is actually host to a lot of strange abandoned things, from an abandoned airport to an entire water park that's been sealed off and left to rot. But the personal plane of Mr. Disney himself has to be one of the strangest. The aircraft is a Grumman G159 Gulfstream I, which the famous creator of All Things Family once used to travel between Burbank and Orlando. It's currently parked in an area near Disney's Animal Kingdom, cordoned off by a small metal fence. The inside of the plane has been gutted, there are absolutely no plans to restore it, and even though the option is out there, museums refuse to take the old piece of junk. It was parked there just after Disney died, when he could no longer use it, and nobody's dared touch it since. Speak up in the comments below if you think they should restore the plane and put it on display in Disney World. Number 3. Abandoned Ancient City. Among the dozens of abandoned ancient cities found in Central America by modern scientists, this one has to be one of the strangest. Scientists have been wondering for years what caused the sudden abandonment of the ancient Mesoamerican city of Cantona. According to Live Science, this place had a population of around 90,000 people, but was abruptly deserted around the year 900. It's located in modern Mexico and was rediscovered by archaeologists just a few years ago. And in case you were wondering, it was not the Maya or the Aztec who lived here. It was a civilization that predates the Aztecs by at least 400 years. After doing some geological surveys in the area, scientists came to the conclusion that the mysterious city was abandoned following a drought that lasted for 650 years. The brutal lack of rain lasted from between 200 BC and 1300 AD. Archaeologists say the population spiked during the earliest part of the dry period, but then the wilting of crops combined with political turmoil drove people out of the fortified city until it was completely empty. Number 2. Leftover skeleton. Yet another grotesque discovery was made recently in an abandoned home, this time in Detroit. Quincy Norman was the one to make the horrifying find. Quincy works for a company contracted by the Detroit Land Bank to look through abandoned houses. He'd been to this particular house several times before he noticed that there was a skeleton left over on the couch in the living room. He couldn't tell if it was the skeleton of a man or a woman, how long the person had been dead, or even how they died. The second he realized he was standing in the room with an abandoned corpse, he ran out of the house, locked the door, and called the police. According to the neighbors, the house had been abandoned for at least 2 years. Nobody had seen or heard anything suspicious from the rapidly decaying piece of property. The police figure the dead person must have been a squatter who took a nap on the couch and died in his sleep. Judging by the fact that he was a skeleton by the time he was found, he'd probably been there ever since the home was first abandoned. That's the kind of story that really makes your skin crawl. It just makes you hope that they fully demolished the property and started from scratch, doesn't it? Number 1. Al Capone's moonshine. Archaeologists in South Carolina have made the bizarre discovery of a moonshine still from the 1920s in the middle of the forest. It happened when researchers were excavating a part of the forest known locally as the Hellhole Swamp. They came across the abandoned moonshine still completely by accident. According to one of the researchers, a graduate student from the University of Tennessee named Catherine Parker, the still was likely used by notorious criminals associated with Al Capone, the legendary gangster. Further investigation revealed that the still was part of a larger liquor distillery that had probably been abandoned after Prohibition came to an end and liquor was made legal once more in the United States. It was used to produce some of the nastiest alcohol ever made, shipped out of South Carolina to other states. It may even have been used after Prohibition was abolished in 1933, seeing as the taxes on liquor in South Carolina made brewing your own booze a lot more affordable than buying it from the store. Number 10. German submarine. If you found a Russian tank in the middle of a cornfield in Kansas, you'd be pretty shocked, right? That's basically what happened here, when an abandoned German submarine from World War II was discovered by amateur divers in a pretty unlikely place. It was found at the bottom of Lake St. Jean in Quebec, Canada. This is a far cry from where most of the fighting was done during World War II. There were no real battles fought on Canadian land during the war, yet this German submarine managed to creep from the ocean, through rivers, and eventually into the lake, where it took out 3 fishing boats before a Canadian destroyer sunk the pesky submarine. For those who don't know, Canada actually entered World War II way before the Americans did. They were considered a major enemy in the eyes of the Germans. To strike at the heart of Canada, the Nazis hatched a plan to send sneaky submarines through rivers to attack industrial targets in Quebec. It didn't really turn out that well since the Canadian destroyers were ready and took out the submarines as soon as they responded. However, this is the only abandoned German sub that's ever been found from the war in Canada. Number 9. Soviet aircraft carrier. Yes, somehow machines of war keep ending up in places you'd never expect. The people who uncover them must be absolutely baffled. Currently, there's a Soviet aircraft carrier rotting in a Chinese lagoon. The vessel is a Kiev-class aircraft carrier called the Minsk, which is abandoned 50 miles, 80 kilometers from the city of Shanghai. How it got there was quite a journey. The aircraft carrier began its life in Ukraine in 1972. It was classified as a heavy aviation cruiser with a displacement of 40,000 tons. It could launch anti-ship cruise missiles, it had twin 76mm guns, and it was big enough for jets and helicopters to land on. It wasn't something you'd want to mess with, but something happened it couldn't prevent. It was 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and the newly formed Russian Navy took possession of the ship. However, it was suffering from engineering problems and had recently experienced a fire in the engine room. The Russians didn't feel like spending the money to fix the ship, so they sold it as scrap. By 1995, the Minsk had made its way to South Korea to be broken apart. That never ended up happening though. The Minsk was purchased by a Chinese entrepreneur who wanted to build a theme park around it. The entrepreneur had the aircraft carrier brought to a lagoon north of Shanghai, but the theme park never really got off the ground. It did open, but just 6 years later, the whole operation went bankrupt. Ever since, the Minsk has been rotting in that same lagoon. And yes, it's still there today. You can go see it, if you dare. Number 8. Google Street View Car. Some of the most remote parts of the world are home to strange sights and abandoned property, and northern India is no exception. An Opel Astra hatchback was discovered crashed off the side of the road in a rocky ravine in what appears to be a northern part of India. The car was discovered with the Google Street View equipment attached to its roof. Nobody knows exactly what happened to this thing, but it was definitely working for Google. It must have been mapping the local streets when it made a wrong turn and went over a cliff. It even has the Google insignia plastered on the passenger door. We don't know if anyone was injured when the car crashed or why it was left abandoned after the fact. Judging by the dirt that's accumulated on the vehicle, it's been sitting at the bottom of the ravine for several years. Hopefully the replacement car was able to map out this remote path without crashing in the process. Number 7. Abandoned spacecraft. There is a huge half-built spaceship called the Baikal, named so after the biggest lake in Russia, abandoned in Moscow. The abandonment of the craft, like so much of the old technology in the Soviet Union, came in 1991 during the collapse. It was part of the Buran space program, with only a few sister crafts being made as well. However, only one of these orbiters ever managed to reach space. When the Soviet Union fell apart, so too did the space program. The Baikal, along with a few other crafts, were scrapped before they could be finished. Most of them were simply abandoned on the factory floor and eventually turned into scrap metal. The Baikal was dumped outside of the factory in Moscow where it was built. It then sat there in the dust for over 10 years. It was eventually dismantled and moved to a parking lot alongside a canal in Moscow, where somebody put it back together and abandoned it yet again. To this day, the half-finished spaceship is still sitting beside the canal. But if you ever wanted to work on renovating a rocket ship in your spare time, you could probably buy the half-built empty Hulk for a super discounted price. Number 6. Incredible barn find. A group of teenagers made a shocking discovery when they broke into a barn in Brazil and found it packed to the ceiling with classic automobiles dating back to the 1920s. It's pretty rare to find classic cars in barns, never mind an entire sanctuary of classic vehicles. These kids found motorcycles, gas pumps, and American muscle cars from the 1970s. Even more shocking was that the vehicles had pretty much no miles on them, suggesting they'd been purchased or moved into the barn immediately after leaving the country. But just where in the world did all these cars come from? According to local Brazilian media, the barn was once a private museum. It was never open to the public, with the owner only showing off his cars to his friend. After the owner of the cars died, his heirs had no idea what to do with all the classic cars, and so they abandoned them in the barn. These guys must have been pretty wealthy to leave such valuable vehicles as a 1952 Style Line, a 1969 Fiat 124 Sport Coupe, and even an original Ford Model T. I wonder who got to sell off the stash of vintage cars and profit from the discovery. Who do you think should? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Death in a Ford truck. Back in 2019, an abandoned Ford truck in Queens made news headlines when a decomposing corpse was discovered sitting casually in the passenger seat. This is by far one of the most gruesome abandoned vehicle discoveries ever. The police actually had to pry open the doors with crowbars to reach the festering body inside. The bus itself, painted in gaudy colors of blue and green, was once a food truck serving national dishes from El Salvador. It had gotten parked on Liberty Avenue and then it was just kind of forgotten about. Nobody paid the ugly thing any attention until a noxious odor began leaking out of it, and someone got curious enough to look in through the window. That was when the body was discovered. According to the New York Daily News, the dead guy had been a local vagrant who collected metal, sold it for scrap, and lived in the abandoned truck. By the time the cops got his body out, he'd been dead for a significant amount of time. He was basically already a mummy. Number 4. Abandoned race circuit. More than an abandoned vehicle, this is an entire abandoned race track. You could, if you really wanted, drive your performance car out here and race to your heart's content. At least as long as the police don't find out. The circuit Flamenco in France is one of the most fascinating abandoned racetracks in the world. It was built back in 1920 and became a favorite racing circuit for the Grand Prix. The famous race car driver François Lescaut won the championship in 1926, driving his Bugatti T35B 2LC. The last Formula One race here was held in 1966. Motorcycle racing continued on the track until 1972, when the place had to shut down because of financial difficulties. A portion of the track was demolished in 2002, but some of it still remains to this day. You won't find any abandoned race cars here, but the pit stops are still around, as are the bleachers, parts of the racetrack, and a few old advertisements from local auto shops. Number 3. The Antarctic Snow Cruiser. Thomas Poulter designed the Antarctic Snow Cruiser between 1937 and 1939. It was meant to be a powerful all-terrain vehicle that would help United States scientists explore Antarctica during an expedition that began in 1940. Almost immediately upon the snow cruiser's arrival in Antarctica, the crew began to experience problems. They couldn't unload the thing from the ship and had to fashion a makeshift ramp. Then once they got the vehicle into the snow, it wouldn't move. The tires were designed to roll freely through the snow and ice, yet it wouldn't move at all. In fact, the vehicle sunk 3 feet, 1 meter into the snow. They ended up having to drive it in reverse, and they only got 92 miles, 150 kilometers. They were forced to abandon the snow cruiser when it became clear it would be of absolutely no help to anyone. The bizarre vehicle was rediscovered in 1946 by yet another expedition to Antarctica. They realized that the vehicle simply needed more air in its tires to make it operational. However, they were unable to do anything about it, and so they left it sitting there in the snow. By the time an international expedition came across the snow cruiser again in 1958, it was covered by 23 feet of snow. They only knew it was there because of a bamboo pole marking its position. They didn't have the ability to melt it out of its hole, so they left it there. Since then, there's been no trace of the mysterious snow cruiser. It's probably entombed somewhere deep under the ice, waiting for future explorers to uncover it in 100 years. Number 2. Tanks at Flamenco Beach. A serene, beautiful beach littered with the husks of old war machines? It's true. But why? Even today, Flamenco Beach in Puerto Rico is still covered in abandoned war tanks. It's one of the most serene and gorgeous landscapes anywhere in the Caribbean, with a beautiful shoreline marred by the rusting tanks left behind by the U.S. Navy. The history behind the tanks and how they got there goes back to 1901 when Spain handed Puerto Rico over to the United States. The president of the time, Theodore Roosevelt, gave the land of Flamenco Beach to the U.S. Navy, who used the beach for testing. Then in 1936, they used it for bombing practice. There was never an official base here, but they did move a ton of equipment into the area, including decommissioned tanks from World War II. They continued missile testing until 1969, bombing the paint right off the tanks. By the 1970s, the locals were getting angry about the unfettered military testing. The Navy was forced to clear out of there, but in their haste, they left behind a ton of stuff, including the tanks that still sit on the beach to this day. Someone should really clear them off the beach and turn it back into a tropical paradise, don't you think? Number 1. Abandoned ghost ship. There's an abandoned ship that recently appeared after being missing for over 9 years. The story of the ship goes back to 2009 when it vanished mysteriously in the Pacific Ocean. The last time the ship was seen, it had a full crew and was sailing away from the Taiwanese coast. The ship, called the Samratulangi PB 1600, lost contact with the outside world, and nobody had any clue what happened to it. Almost 10 years later, it reappeared suddenly in the ocean south of Myanmar. A group of local fishermen were the first to find the vessel. Out of curiosity, they entered the ship and found nobody on board. The ship was totally empty, without crew or cargo. Nobody knows what happened to this thing in the years that it was seemingly nowhere on Earth. The best guess scientists can come up with is that the crew abandoned the vessel and ran away. However, their bodies have never been found, and they've never resurfaced in any country. It's as if they literally vanished into thin air, leaving the ship to wander the ocean as a ghost until it finally marooned itself on the shore. Would you dare step foot on a spooky ghost ship? Let us know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button for all the greatest videos from American Eye. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.